Welcome to the October 8th Finance Committee meeting of the Council Rock School Board. First, we're going to go around the room to start off with some introductions. I'm Kristen Marcel with the School Board. Mr. Tate, would you like to take it from here?
That's me, Mr. Tate, School Board. Thank you, Ms. Marcel.
Mike Thorward, School Board.
Mary Ann McKee, School Board.
Ms. Brooks, are you on the line?
I'm sorry, did you just call me?
We're just doing introductions. If you could just...
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, okay, I'm Denise Brooks, School Board, and I'm here too.
Thank you very much.
Bill Stone, Business Manager for the School District.
I'm Bob Pellegrino. I'm the Township Manager in Northing.
And I believe we have a guest on the line.
We
Mr.
do.
Stone, would you like
Yes.
to announce him?
Kevin, would you mind saying hello, please?
Yep. Hello, Kevin Carpuck with Cornerstone Advisors Asset Management.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stone, where would you like to begin this evening?
So we have one very quick item that is to be moved to the board agenda for our November 5th meeting. So before we have our guests do their presentation, I'd like to just quickly discuss that and move that forward. The agenda for this evening's meeting includes that action item, plus the two presentations from our guests, and a couple of other updates that I have regarding how we finished our 2019-20 fiscal year, starting then into the 21-22 budget development, and an update on the MBIT project fund.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stone. And actually, before you start off, I just wanted to mention that Mr. Block had a business conflict this evening, and Mr. Salomon is traveling, and so they will not be here tonight. Mr. Bialik should be here shortly, and then he'll be joining us. We'll introduce him at that time. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So the item that we have to recommend for your approval at the November 5th meeting is a one-time transfer from the general fund to the food service fund. This is an annual recommendation to subsidize the free and reduced lunch students at Council Rock High School North and Council Rock High School South. Those two buildings are not on the National School Lunch Program, but we still historically wish to confer the free and reduced lunch price benefits to those students. So every year, once the year is concluded, we transfer an amount equal to the subsidy that we would have received from the general fund into the food service fund. And that amount for this past year is $98,116. As you can see on the table here on the front, that is slightly less than what we've seen in years past, but the reason for that obviously is that the last quarter of the school year was the mandated closure due to the pandemic. So that explains why the amount is less. Any questions on this item?
Are there any questions? No? Okay.
Okay, very good. So our next item is a cash management update from Mr. Carpuck of Cornerstone. So Kevin, I'll turn it over to you, and I will do my best to advance the slide as you're ready. But if you need me to move them ahead, just say so, and I'll run the controls.
That sounds good, and thank you again, everybody, for taking the time. I think just like everything else in life, COVID really has kind of gummed up the work here in terms of cash management and expected returns. And part of the conversation today, we're hoping, is to kind of set appropriate expectations and kind of remind everybody about how the program's built and you know, the safety, liquidity, and then yield type arrangements. So if you jump to slide 3, Bill, it says Treasury yield curve. Obviously, the Federal Reserve, in response to COVID, cut rates significantly earlier this year. And what we're looking at here is 3 different time periods for the Treasury yield curve: the end of 2017, the end of 2019, and then just the end of the third quarter here, which is the gray line that basically tracks down along the bottom of that curve. And we highlighted the area from 1 month to about 2 years which are really the sweet spot for where we manage cash for the school district for a lot of reasons, so we can get into those details. But look at how quickly, even from the beginning of this calendar year, how significantly these drops have happened. You know, at the beginning of the year, we could buy a 1 month T-bill and make about 1.5% per year. Now that's 0.08%. And we've updated this presentation a couple times, and for very good reasons have pushed off this presentation. But over that time, these rates have continued to come down. And as we'll talk about in just a minute, the Federal Reserve is committed to keeping these short rates down for an extended period of time. So clearly the market has been moving against favors as the Fed's trying to keep the economy running and get people spending. So if you go to page 4 or slide 4, you see a chart of the 10-year Treasury. So this is a 10-year bond which moves, that we're showing you moving over time back to the middle of 2019, and you can see that significant drop right in the, in that February type time frame of this year. And this is an area of the curve that we invest in, right? These are longer bonds and not within our investment policy statement, but we thought it was important to show these to you because they're legal, they're just not within our policy. But the idea of trying to stretch to earn extra income really is a fool's errand right now, because a 10-year Treasury has risk in it. If interest rates go up, you can lose some of your principal, and what would be the benefit of doing that would be to earn about 0.75% in income per year. So again, not something we look at, but we are looking at many different options and trying to figure out how to optimize this. So going out further doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you go to slide 5, you can see this is more in our wheelhouse. This is a half-year-long Treasury, and this is just to depict how quickly this drop happened. When the Federal Reserve has emergency weekend meetings and cuts rates, you can see how quickly that rate fell out of bed from 1.5% to basically 0 right now. During the height of the financial stress, that 6-month Treasury actually had a negative yield, which meant investors would be paying the government to ensure that they got their money back in 6 months. On slide 6, and this is a little bit of an eye chart, but this is what's called the Fed dot plot. So each meeting, the Federal Reserve gets together and they not only vote on what current rates are, but they also survey each of the members to say where do they think rates will be at the end of 2020, at the end of 2021, at the end of 2022, and then longer term. Well, each of those blue dots is one of the voting members, one of the people on the Fed who sets rates. And you can see that across the board, nobody thinks rates are going to be increased in 2020. Nobody thinks they're going to be increased in 2021. And you have a couple outliers in 2022 who think the Fed might be able to come off of 0. And then longer run, so that's out 3 to 5 years, they're saying that, potentially, there's potential for the Fed to be able to raise rates. The red dots on here are what the market thinks, and the market, and this is actually cash money that people are putting on to say where they think future rates are going to be. You notice the red dots below the blue dots, and there isn't one in the longer run, but the market is indicating that the Fed is probably having a rosier vision of the long run than the market does, and the market in 3 to 5 years is saying maybe the Fed can get back to 1% or 1.5% Obviously, a lot of this has to do with how quickly a vaccine comes out, how quickly therapeutics and all of that good stuff, and we are not epidemiologists by any stretch of the imagination, but as long as there are economic impacts from COVID, right, whether that's rolling shutdowns, whether it's limitations to the amount of people who can attend different events, you know, the economy is really going to struggle to get back to a growth type footing that would allow the Fed to raise rates. So, you know, we do think that we are in a lower for longer type setup. So that leads, if you just go one slide ahead to where you see 2020 tactics, the market beta. So as interest rates were going up over the past several years, we've been able to take advantage of that, and we've been able to do some things within the portfolio that heighten that advantage without taking on risk. But with rates coming down, what we're going to need to rely on is what we call advisor alpha, which is trying without taking on undue risk and all within the realm of the policy, is to try to find where there might be opportunities to squeeze out some extra return. Again, with the idea that risk is paramount. So the ideas that come out of this are, you know, we have been talking to other depository institutions. There are a lot of banks that want to do business with the Council Rock School District. We know that we need to have really solid collateral behind it for any amounts over FDIC, and we're not going to move money to a new depository or bring a new depository to the school board, you know, without having some kind of extra return tied to it. So that's one example of what we're looking at. And, you know, the downside of that is we may be able to find some banks who are willing to pay up a little bit more than the market, but at the aggregate level, deposits in commercial banks so far this year have increased by $2.5 trillion. So the Federal Reserve is putting money out on the street, and people are putting it into their bank account. So just simple supply and demand says the banks have a lot of cash right now that they're struggling to get out and invest. So, you know, we're hopeful that we'll be able to find some partner depository institutions, but we don't think it'll be a home run in terms of finding banks who are solvent and willing to pay significantly above market rate. On slide 8, where you see the program summary, I'll just hit again on the fact that, you know, and on my sheet I saved the circles and highlighted. That's always our number one target here. You know, for us to ever be in a position where we do not at least return the invested capital is not acceptable, and it's not something we would look at. And then liquidity and yield are very much secondary to that. So on slide 9, what we're looking at is we have 4 approved partner organizations, whether they're money managers or whether they're depositories. You can see where current yields are right now, where Fleet is paying 0.05%, Stonecastle is paying 0.2, TD's about 0.15, and Wilmington Trust is about 0.12. You know, these are yields that are anemic. They harken back to when Council Rock first engaged Cornerstone to manage the assets. So we already talked about why we wouldn't buy bonds that had longer maturities. Well, we went out and we said, okay, what if, just for a mental exercise, what if I was willing to utilize some of the Act 10 less safe investment products? What could we get for the district? And quite frankly, when you look out at commercial paper, which is really just short-term corporate bonds, you're lending to corporations. those yields are about 0.12 right now. So you're not picking up any significant yield compared to the risk you would be taking. So other than finding, maybe a small number, 2 or 3 depositories who are solid and have solid collateral, we're not going to be asking the board to stray from the policy just because there isn't enough return potential to offset the risk. Page 10, I included this just because where you see the 2 circles, we're showing the blue lines are the cash levels over the past couple of years for the district, and you see them peeling down. But the purple dots there's the 2 sets of 3 purple dots are circles because up until this year, what we would do early in the year when our cash amounts were high was go out and give money to Wilmington Trust, who would invest the money for 9 months to a year, and it would mature exactly when the district needed to make, for example, the year-end payment. We're looking at that now, and the opportunity really has attracted. So last year we picked up about 1%, or call it about $200,000 of return by doing that. This year, that number may be 10,000 or 20,000 to get that to do the same program. So again, we're things the target, the budget target is probably at not going to happen this year, but at the same time, it's not only because we're being extremely conservative, but it's because almost no matter how we design it, the market has changed enough since we originally gave Bill the projections back in the spring. But the good news, if you go to page 12, is we don't get paid for what we've done in the past, obviously. But bottom line, and I'm below all of the cash flows, you see the general fund year-to-date income for last year was just a hair under 1.9 million. So it was ahead of target, probably ahead of target by about as much as, we may be behind target this year. But the managers, if you look at page 13, each of each of our underlying managers, and you look at the bottom to see who's who. The orange triangle with the letter F is Wilmington Trust. The green square with the letter C is Pliget, and TD is the tan. In the numbers, if you look at the top, in the parentheses are the peer group ranking. So if of all the choices we had, how did these folks perform? And you can see over the past quarter, year to date, 2 year, 3 year, 3.5 years, almost all of our partners are at the very top of the peer group. They're giving us more return than the average money market would have. So on that level, they're doing their jobs, and we're quite pleased with the fact that they have been above market in terms of rates of return without taking on undue risk. And I won't spend too much time on the rest of the presentation, but I did want to jump to slide 17. I believe this has been reported to you, but I drew a blank on whether I had presented it. We had, back in March, gotten rid of the collateral from TD, which was credit card loans and automobile loans, and replaced it with a letter of credit backed by the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh. So I know that's one of the long-term things we wanted to get done, and that has been done. So it removed some of our minimal but very real concerns about collateral in case TD had any issues.
just wanted to add, thank you so much for the presentation, Kevin, and I just wanted to add that Mr. Bialik is here and also Mr. Hidalgo is here. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Bialik so that he can run the rest of it.
Okay, I'm so far away. I'm having a hard time with my board docs. So if anybody has a printed agenda, I appreciate that. I can't get on my board docs. But let me say while we're getting the agenda and getting myself together. So Kevin, thank you. So really what you've told us is that we've reduced the risk of our investments and increased the income to the district. And you've done that consistently over the past several years since we've engaged you, which took some time, as you know, and it was a process. And I congratulate this board and the previous board again for seeing the value in that, and we certainly see it today. So historically, prior to bringing on Cornerstone, that if we had a slide presentation, which we really never did, we would have TD Bank and Pliget only, with the vast majority of the funds in Pliget. And if you go back to Kevin's slide that showed the, Kevin, can you go back to that?
I'm getting there, Kevin.
Yeah, that one, perfect. So Kevin's not running that, it's Matt, I'm sorry.
I'm running
Or you are, Bill.
Yep.
So we would have had all of our money in those two entities, which Pliget has the lowest rate on the screen, so that would mean less income for the district. And TD Bank, we had no idea about this until Kevin came along. But TD Bank, as Kevin said, our deposits were backed by credit card receipts and auto loans. Now, I don't know the default risk of credit card receipts and auto loans for our governmental funds that really we're not allowed to take any risk, but it gives me much more, it puts me much more at ease to have it backed by letter of credit from as it is now. So Kevin, I appreciate it. I wish more school districts would take advantage of what you give us and the help that you give this board, the fiduciary assistance you give this board, and I know Bill appreciates everything you do as well. So thank you, Kevin. That was a great presentation.
Well, thank you for those kind words, and we're going to keep grinding for y'all as much as possible within prudence.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on. I know Mr. Pellegrino is here from Northampton Township, and we're going to talk about the LERTA program. So, Bill, are you leading off, or Bob, are you taking it right away?
So I think I'll just very quickly reintroduce Bob Pellegrino. He's the township manager for Northampton Township. Bob was here the day before we closed for the pandemic, and he was presenting about the LERTA program extension, and now that things have, I was about to say somewhat settled down, they really haven't, but it's time to revisit the topic, and I invited Bob to come back and just brief the board again on the program, and he's here to answer any questions that you might have before the board is asked to vote upon the extension. So, Mr. Pellegrino.
Before I get started, let me just commend you for hiring Concord. I serve on the board of the Delaware Valley Trust, and we use them for the same purpose, and they do a terrific job for us. Anyway, I am here, thank you very much. I am here tonight to answer questions on the LERTA program. I'm going to briefly just review what it is for those who might not know. LERTA is an acronym for the Local Economic Revitalization Tax Assistance Act. You know, government, everyone has an acronym, and LERTA is the one for this. This is an act that was adopted by the legislature in 1977, and it allows governments to provide tax relief to incent development and redevelopment. It was intended for blighted areas, but it also can be used in areas that are depressed or haven't had, I'll call it a facelift, in a very long time. We have some of those areas in the township, as you know, in Holland and in Richboro. 5 years ago, the school board was very gracious to agree to adopt a program. Our program was for a 5-year period. We are asking for an extension of that program for another 5 years. And the program is a 100% tax abatement on the value of the increase in assessed value of a property as it's redeveloped. So as an example, if someone has a property that's assessed at $10,000 and they do an addition and the new assessment would be $15,000, the $5,000 increase is what is abated, not the underlying $10,000. That still remains on the tax rolls. Taxes are still paid on that. But for the $5,000, that tax would be abated for 5 years. Now, the process to implement a program like this requires the township board to approve a resolution that identifies certain districts in the community. In our case, we have proposed districts in Richboro, in Holland. The new program has a tiny, tiny area near Village Shires that you may know of as the Village Shires Shopping Center, and then our business park up along Jacksonville Road. So those are the areas. The areas in Holland and Richboro follow the outline of our Village Overlay District, which is also a zoning district that encourages and incents redevelopment. So we had in the first round, in the first 5-year period, we had 7 properties that took advantage of the program. They are, I think you might have a copy of that list, but they are all relatively small businesses. One was a new business that went into the old Richboro schoolhouse. There were a couple in the industrial park, and the Campbell Thomas Funeral Home did some work that qualified. Only things that change assessed value qualify for the program. So if you're doing interior modifications or something like that, where the county assessor's office is not going to come down and reassess the improvement, they don't qualify. But if there's a change in the assessed value, it would qualify for the program. So our Board of Supervisors adopted this map that identified the alerted districts. That's done by resolution. And following that, the law requires the township to adopt an ordinance that would establish the parameters of the program. In that case, the 5 years and 100%. The law provides for different timeframes, up to 10 years, and different. We can structure the tax abatement at different percentage levels, but we believe, and I think the county believes, that our program is one of the cleanest and easiest to administer. So following the board's adoption of its ordinance to implement the program, we would need the school district and the county to adopt resolutions for their portion of the tax liability. The county has told me, verbally at least, that they would support it. I can tell you from my experience of 10 years on the County Planning Commission, this is a program that they endorse and they believe does incent economic development. Now, if you're familiar with Richboro and you're familiar with Holland, you know there are some depressed properties. We have the old Mill Race Inn. We have some undeveloped land in Richboro, portions along 2nd Street Pike, south of Addisville Commons, even some just north of the main intersection. And we are looking as a township to redevelop our business districts, improve our business districts, enhance our tax base, enhance your tax base. All of it under the guidelines of 2 master plans. One is for the village of Richboro. I brought copies if I can leave them. One is for the village of Holland. The master plans contemplate road improvements. They contemplate walkability and pedestrian facilities and the like. And much like you'd see in any small urban town that has been revitalized, like Haddonfield, for example, in New Jersey, or even Newtown Borough to some degree. New Hope, Doylestown is a good example of revitalization. I'm very familiar with Doylestown because I grew up in that area and I was borough manager there in the early 80s. So when you create historic districts and when you incent the business community and the private sector, as long as economics are good, they tend to respond. This is a program that we think is beneficial and will help. We don't have a very large commercial tax base. To cite an example, we are about, our total tax assessed value, about 5% of that is commercial properties. The rest is residential, unlike Newtown Township, where I served as manager for a period. That has a very nice balance of 20% of commercial to its total assessed value. It provides much more tax revenue that's not from the residential tax base, and it helps to keep the residential tax base, the tax rate down. And you can see that. I'm not comparing Northampton and Newtown. There is no comparison, but Newtown has a very low residential property tax rate, and I think Northampton does, relatively speaking, but Newtown's is unusually low, and I think that is in large part due to the commercial tax base that they have. At this point, I've provided the district with a sample resolution. It's pretty much the same resolution that was adopted 5 years ago. I'm hoping that the school district will adopt the program. Again, I don't believe there's going to be a lot of properties that take advantage of this. We had 7 in the first round. I can't predict how many will take advantage of it in the next 5 years, but we do believe that it is a positive thing for the community and for the tax base as a whole. So with that brief introduction, if you will, I'll try and answer questions.
Very helpful, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Pellegrino?
I have many. Can I start? First, I'll make a statement. We as a district, and Mark will acknowledge this, are in trouble financially and are going to have a big smoking crater in our budget in the coming years. We're mashing the pedal on tax increases on our residents, and you're asking me to do it, give a break to businesses. So I'm not making fun of you, Mr. Pellegrino.
I understand.
It's a real problem for me along that line. My questions then are, those that benefited from LRTA in the first 5 years, if we extend this, do they continue to get a benefit?
They do not.
Okay.
It's a one and done.
Perfect. And then Northampton's been in the news with a super Wawa in the Lower Holland Green thing, so they would get a benefit. We would be giving a tax break to a corporation for that, correct?
Well, not actually to Wawa, but to the developer.
Okay.
Because Wawa does not, they got out of owning real estate a while back. So their arrangement is to hire developers to develop the property, and they build their store, and they pay triple net lease. So it would be to the whoever continues with ownership of the property.
Okay. And then secondly, I read in the paper, the township has proposed 180 apartments, basically up against Richboro Elementary, right next to Richboro Elementary. That's township land.
It is.
So I have 2 questions. One's for Mr. Stone, and you get back to me. If the township builds 180 apartments, the value of that property just increased exponentially. Does that benefit us or not? And are they would that be in the LRTA program as well?
Residential is not eligible for LRTA, so that is not the case. They would not be eligible for the program. Let me just clarify one thing that you mentioned. The township is not building apartments. We have been approached by a developer who owns and has built apartment complexes that are sort of like mini self-contained communities. This would be high-end apartments. rents between 1,700, and I'm not trying to sell them, or I'm just telling you what I know, what we've been told, 1,700 to 2,300 a month. They're all 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. They've shown us, they provided us information that in their other facilities, and they have 17 of them in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, they don't generate a lot of school kids. The property, if the township leases it to them, we would not be selling it, would be then become taxable. So they would pay property taxes, and there would be earned income taxes, of course, from whoever moves into those facilities. What I know is that they are 1-year leases minimum. They don't do any short-term leasing. And I know we've heard some residents express concern about transients and so forth. That is not the case with this project. What I understand they've proposed is 180 apartments in 6 buildings with an 8,000 or 9,000 square foot clubhouse and a pool.
And lots of parking lots.
And a large parking lot.
No, my concern, you don't have to sell it to us. My
I'm not
concern was
trying to
the
sell it.
tax base.
I'm just giving you information because I know it was in the newspaper, and there was very little information in the newspaper, and I feel that a lot of calls from people who didn't have all the facts. So I'm trying to just, if I'm telling you this, it's just because I want you to have the facts.
And the fact I need is, and I think we all need, is how many kids. I will tell you that across Buck Road from Hillcrest, a new housing development's going in. That means kids. I've heard rumblings that Bucks County Roses is going to be turned into townhouses. That means children. And we just redistricted, and we are full in some of these schools. And so all these things together comes with a price for the school district in some fashion. So I'm just trying to get my hands around what's happening there.
Well,
So.
let me just speak to that if I may. Roses, Bucks County Roses, there have been 3 applications to change the zoning on that property. The board is not inclined to do that. There were 63 townhomes. They were higher end. They were 650, 700,000. That's not happening. They may come back with age qualified, which would not affect you at all. They may come back with R2, which would be half the number of homes, 30 maybe, something like that. But again, the board has to change the zoning to allow those kinds of uses, and right now it's zone R1. And we haven't seen any other applications. And on the Wawa project, right now that seems to be on hold. And I don't know if that's COVID related or if it's just that Wawa has decided that, step back, it's an expensive Wawa to build because we are making them realign Holland Road. And that's easily $1 million just to do that. And the realignment, that's why I brought these master plans, because the realignment is contemplated in our master plans. And if they were coming in, the requirement was, you've got to build what we want you to build.
And that's fine. I'm sorry we digressed into
No,
that.
it's all right.
I'm looking at, we need all the revenue we can get.
Dr. Thor, can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
I think your questions are really great regarding other development in the township, specifically that apartment building, because we are starting to get some questions from residents about that building. So maybe it might be a good idea to have the township come back for, I don't know if it would fit well in a facilities committee meeting or a finance committee meeting here. I'm certainly happy to host it in a finance committee meeting if Ms. Marcel doesn't object. But just to have a discussion about these apartment buildings, because I have questions too, as everybody does. Really, how many kids? That's the big one for me. How many
Well,
kids?
the developer has told us from his experience there are very few children. What I can do is ask him to provide documentation on the number of kids that are in his other complexes. And this is actually a relatively small complex that he's proposing to build, because his other his other projects are upwards of 500 units. So, there's going to be a difference. But let me see if I can get a better number on the children. They're 1 and 2 bedroom units. There's no 3 bedroom units in the project.
Well, what I would suggest is, because this wasn't on the agenda for tonight, and I don't know if anyone is really prepared to discuss it and ask good questions like Dr. Thorward did. So perhaps we can have you come back.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Even at next month's finance committee meeting, maybe. You agree?
You may have more board members.
Yeah, we have to join. I think next month is.
What depends on what night it is, because I'll be doing budget in November.
I got you. So when is this project slated to begin?
It's a slow burn.
Okay.
So there's nothing that's going to happen anytime soon. If anything were to happen, I would say, and really the decision the supervisors have to make, and they are still doing their due diligence, is whether they want to lease the land or not. If they don't want to lease the land, it's not going to happen. If they decide they're going to lease the land, and of course that's revenue to the township, and like you, we desperately need every dollar we can get. We've been hit with COVID too, and it's not a pretty sight. This next budget's not going to be pretty. But that's really the decision point that they have. Do they want to lease the land? And if they do, it's a permitted use in the district. So then the applicant would just proceed to land development plans.
Okay. I think it'd be worth a full discussion where we have an opportunity. Do you have a question about the apartments or Lerda? Okay.
Very simply, Mr. Pellegrino, did you say 120 units?
180.
180, okay. Thanks. Thanks for coming, by the way.
My pleasure.
And we had a discussion about Lerda 6 months ago, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes, right
before
in March.
This is a continuation of the same discussion, it's the same proposal? Okay.
Same proposal.
Just to clarify, okay.
Yes, our board approved the resolution to establish the districts in May, and they adopted the ordinance in June, and then we got into the middle of COVID, and I had talked to Bill about getting it on your agenda, and everybody was
That's fine.
busy
Thanks,
with other stuff. So,
Just clarifying, thank you.
Marianne?
Thank you. Mr. Pellegrino, thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate your explanation of the program. Help me to understand it well, and I certainly appreciate the position of Northampton Township. But I just want to give a little feedback. As already mentioned, financially, we're really in quite a situation, and we have raised taxes on our community. We are looking to achieve revenue wherever we can. And I just have to say, for me personally, philosophically, it is really hard for me to justify a tax abatement for businesses when I know all too well individuals and families in our community that are bearing such a financial burden and finding their financial effort in terms of the district to be almost more than they can bear. So I just wanted to give some feedback. While I most certainly appreciate your position, for me it is very hard to justify a tax abatement for businesses when I feel our individual community members are really having a difficult burden to bear.
you might want to think of it a little differently, because our belief is that many of the projects that happened in the last 5 years would not have happened except for Lerda. So what you have really is a deferment of tax revenue that may not have even happened in the 6th year if you didn't have a Lerda program. So you might want to think about it that way. This is a long-term play, and it's designed to increase the tax base, and I think it can do that. It's proven it can do that in other places in Pennsylvania. It's used all over the state. I think there are 6 or 7 communities just in Bucks County that have this type of program in a bunch of different school districts. I know up in Penn Ridge they have it. I'm trying to think of Quakertown. So it's something to consider.
I appreciate that. Honestly, I don't know, and perhaps you could inform me, how much we would need to incentivize a company like Wawa to build. I don't know that it's necessary for this program to incentivize businesses to either build or renovate or do work that they might already do without Lerda.
Well, that's a valid point. Again, it's not Wawa, it's the developer, but Wawa ultimately pays through their lease. And there would be a benefit to that. We would not, without Wawa, we would not be, and let me just be frank, Wawa was not something we contemplated when we put our master plan together. It wasn't like, oh wow, we're gonna do this, and let's get a Wawa on that site. That was not the intent. They just happened to look at the site, say, we could move our store. They would obviously close the one in Holland, they call them legacy stores without gas, and close that legacy store and move up the street. We were not looking to get a Wawa there, but they came in and they are willing to spend the money to give us the road improvements that we need to improve the business climate in Holland. Now, what happens when they realign Holland Road is that Holland and Buck Road now come to a point that would no longer exist. Holland Road would turn and go into Buck Road, and the rest of Holland Road would be up at least until the last residential home would be still a public road. But beyond that, we're creating a developable, an area that could be developed and expanded. So we're looking to expand the tax base by doing this road alignment. And Wawa just happens to be the one that came in and said, okay, we'll spend $1 million+ to do what you want to make this road network work for you the way you think it should work. So if you looked at the Holland master plan, and I wish I could have put it up on the screen, maybe next time I can do that. Maybe that would be a good idea too, Mark. I could tell you what we're
For the board
doing.
meeting, to have that master plan available for the PowerPoint.
Yeah, we have it electronically, so I could direct you to a certain couple pages, but I'll leave these hard copies here tonight, and I can send Bill the electronic copies. But again, the idea was try and create more developable areas so we can attract more business and create a larger tax base to increase our tax revenue without having to raise taxes in the
Ms. Marcel?
Thank you, Austin, for coming this
My
evening.
pleasure.
I had a quick question. I was thinking about what you just mentioned as far as a larger tax base. Do you have any data, and I'm not sure if this is something that is worth looking at, for how many jobs were created from the previous LRTA?
I can tell you about a couple properties on this list that I know personally. Campus Close, the first one, added about 25 jobs because they literally doubled the size of their building. And I'm sorry, I forgot my glasses. The old Richboro Schoolhouse, which was the old Richboro Schoolhouse, which was owned by the township, ultimately sold under blighted regulations, where they created about 15 jobs. That's a professional engineering firm that's in there, and they are now leasing space, and there are other office people in that building, and now they're looking at an addition, a sizable addition, which will also bring in more jobs. So I don't have a time frame for that, but I can tell you that the supervisors approved what's called an amendment to the stipulation settlement agreement that approved the original development with TD Bank there and the schoolhouse, and that is what the developer, the owner needed to see in order for him to proceed with his project. Now, he's told us he's probably not going to do anything for a couple of years, but I can tell you that that's going to be a very good thing, because that will bring a lot more jobs into the town.
Thank you.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Pellegrino, for coming today. Is that online, the LRTA map?
It is.
Okay, so I can find that. Great.
It's in your board docs.
I'm actually looking in it. I don't see any attachments.
I brought a hard copy if you want it. Would you like a hard copy?
Must be the one I'm signed into. No, it's okay, thank you. So you weren't at the last meeting, you were?
I was.
Okay.
I'm it.
We talked about the, no, because I remember one of the,
I had
supervisors
one of my
being
board
there.
members here, Barry, I think. was here.
Oh, I thought there was another, maybe
Was it Eileen?
Eileen came.
Maybe it was
once.
Eileen.
Supposed to be Barry, but Eileen came. She did a lot of the talking. It was a crazy time right then, right before. But I remember we talked about the golf course being highlighted, and I thought that was a vast property. Wondering why it was part of the plan, if there was any contemplation in the next 5 years of developing that.
The golf course?
I think that's what that big piece is.
No, that is, I must have sent you the wrong map. That golf course should be gone. Maybe
That's what I
sent-
asked last time, yeah.
Yeah, that's off, the new map doesn't
Okay,
have.
that
it.
I should be able to look at.
Yeah, you should be able
Okay.
to see that.
That
Yeah,
takes care of that.
that golf
Easy enough.
course, as you probably are aware, there's townhomes being built on what was the chip and putt course, and the rest of it has a conservation easement on it, so
Right.
it will never be developed.
Okay, understood. I only mention it because I still see it up on there.
Yeah,
for
my
the public to
apologies.
know.
Maybe I sent you the wrong file.
Maybe.
Then the timeline for the Richboro master plan, there's a lot of good things that can go on there. Like, I just think of the Richboro Swim Club, that someday that would be a big asset to sell off and develop. What's the timeline for houses go, where we're gonna start doing the streets and doing the gates and road work and traffic?
Are you familiar with the master plan?
I looked over it, yeah.
Okay, great. And the township road extension and roundabout project is at a point where we are close to getting a PennDOT permit. Every traffic signal we own has a PennDOT permit associated with it. And we have to operate the signal and stripe the roads in accordance with the permit. Roundabouts are the same. We need a permit. It's a traffic control device. So we are close to getting the permit for that. The board just last week approved an application for a grant to build that roundabout and the township road extension. We're asking DCED for $3.7 million. There's a lot of moving parts here. Perhaps the apartment project, if it does move forward, would be tasked with building a portion of that, probably the township road extension portion. So the township would only be obligated to build the roundabout with grant funds, hopefully. But the timing of that is we will probably not hear until the spring, whether we are successful in getting any grant funds. And if that is the case, we have to see how much we're going to get. We'll have to see if this apartment project moves forward, because if it doesn't, then we have to come up with some matching money. If it does, then I think we would probably not have to put anything into it. So timing-wise, if we had approvals in the spring, the design is finished, we could conceivably be out to bid next fall or summer, and construction would probably be completed sometime in the middle of '22.
So would that include all the sidewalks and everything that I'm seeing on some of the page, like the vast project?
The sidewalks are a different project. We have a sidewalk project for downtown Richboro. There's also a Buck Road Improvement Project, which I can talk about if you want.
No, I'm just trying to get an idea of, are we going to get flooded in the next 5 years with a lot of building renovations along Second Street Pike and such? You know,
It
that's
looks
what I'm
that
trying-
way. We
Yeah.
are going to be out to bid with a portion of the sidewalk project. We call it Phase 1, probably within the next couple of months. We have a $500,000 grant. The township has, as its share, paid for the engineering design and the construction inspection we're on the hook for. That's going to complete a portion of the sidewalks along Second Street Pike. We have some projects, like McDonald's is coming in with a renovation to their property. They'll be completing the sidewalks as part of a development project. We have a couple other smaller ones that are going to be completed by development projects. So we're looking to, in the next couple of years, complete our sidewalk project and complete the roundabout and Township Road extension.
So when they do that, you would think the businesses would want to improve
I
in front
do.
of them. That's
I
why I
think-
lived on a road that did that
I
in
do.
Bristol, and that everybody macked it out, you know?
I think that roundabout is going to be an identifying symbol of downtown. I mean, there aren't many of them. There's
Right.
one on Maple Avenue, as you know. It would be very similar to that one in size. But we hope that the businesses look at that as an improvement in the traffic system to disperse traffic. And we think our traffic engineers tell us it will do that. Also, we have the connector road, which we will eventually come up with a name for, that goes from Alms House Road to the Wawa in Richboro to Second Street Pike.
Oh, wow.
So that's been done. That was done by development.
Yeah.
And by Addisville Commons did a portion of it, and then TCG Realty, which is Giuseppe's, did the first piece of it.
It's a good road to run, too.
And that has dispersed some traffic. We have other projects that we're working on for our traffic signal system in the village of Richboro. We're doing that. That's out to bid, I think, right now, and that's to do some signal timing and coordination along the entire stretch from Schoolhouse Commons down to Tanyard Road. And then we have a sidewalk project that's going to put sidewalks on both sides of Second Street Pike from Tanyard Road just past the old Wawa, the old Legacy store there, and get across the creek. And that is we did the engineering design for that. PennDOT's doing the construction, and that should be happening anytime now.
That's our
gonna get
gateway,
started.
right?
Pardon me?
That's the gateway or something.
That's the gateway.
Okay.
And that little park there, the Ironworks Creek Park, we're planning to clean up and make a nice entryway into the village.
That's exciting stuff. I appreciate you for giving all the detail. I don't want to take up everybody's time, but there's one more thing I wanted to touch on, and that has to do with the 180 apartments that could possibly come. And right now in this pandemic, there's a moratorium on rent. And so that brings up questions about what that could mean to us in the future if that happens. But more importantly, and I would like to, maybe you're not a housing lawyer, but I'm sure you deal with this all the time, or understand some of it. When we come back and do the discussion, my questions are something like, could the government, with what they're doing with certain initiatives, force in Section 8 subsidies and that type of thing on to us once the apartments are built?
Not once they're built. I think the proposal that I've heard expressed is that they would require local zoning ordinances to mandate a certain percentage of housing be low-income housing. New Jersey has this. 20% of the community or of a project, if you're doing high density, has to be low income. And I don't remember the case over there, but they have a similar regulation. We have to provide in Pennsylvania for all types of housing in our zoning ordinance, but we're not required to have low-income housing. And frankly, unless it's mandated by the federal government, our land values are so high that no one's coming in to build low-income housing. And these are high-end apartments. They're, I may have mentioned $1,700 to $2,300 a month. And the owner of these complexes, their minimum one-year leases. He does criminal background checks. He does financial background checks. He has regulations on the tenants, and if they violate them, as he's told me, they're out.
Like homeowner association rules, they won't be able to have people stay there that don't belong there.
Don't
And then
hang your towel
last
over the
question
banister.
regarding this would be, well, it seems like everybody wants to go on. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was.
What are you referring to?
Elevators. Are there elevators?
Yeah, there will be.
proposed? Okay, that was it. Thanks.
Okay, good questions.
I have one more alerter related.
Go ahead.
The green spot in Richboro that you've got there, if I'm not mistaken, 1/3 to 1/2 of that property is ours. Why are we giving ourselves a tax break?
Is what?
Is ours. I see Richboro Elementary and Richboro Middle School
I don't,
as part of the LERTA. That, why would we want to LERTA ourselves?
I think that follows the boundaries of our village overlay district. I think that's all that was. So if you're not selling the property, what's the difference?
I think it sends bad message. I personally like that out. So I don't want to give ourselves a tax break or even.
Well, you wouldn't.
I understand, but I don't even want to give any whiff of going that way. So that's it.
Thank you. So before I comment, Ms. Brooks, I think you're on the phone. Do you have any questions or comments for Mr. Pellegrino?
No, thanks. Actually, the one question I had was relative to why the school properties were actually on the map there. That was confusing to me. As a general comment, I'll just say that when we talked about this years ago and voted for it for the first time, I thought it was really a great collaboration between two governing bodies to help sort of support the local community. And Bob's reference to the fact that there were improvements made potentially as a result of this that would not have happened otherwise is really compelling. So my inclination is to think that this is a great thing and that it, the spirit of this is great, but we're in a very different time now. And so we have to be just really thoughtful and think through all the implications of this before we just simply say it's been great and we continue. But I thank you for this information and we'll see where it goes. But no other questions, thanks.
Thank you. Is there any other board members on the phone? No? Okay. All right. So, this was a little tougher last time than I thought it was going to be. If you remember, there were some board members who had concerns. I was sitting here trying to just remember who was on the board at the time. I don't know if Mr. Thor,
I know
Dr. Thor,
Mr. Grupp was on the board, and he had a lot of
Yeah.
questions.
Be careful, because he'll call in with questions. I think this is a challenge. So I think it's certainly a worthwhile challenge. And for me, it all comes down to the math. So I think what we're going to have to see, and I don't know where the collaboration comes from, or if it's going to be the two of you, or maybe just the township. But it feels to me like we need a cost-benefit analysis, so basic cost-benefit analysis, because there is a cost, potentially, of abating tax. Now, I completely understand that these may not be renovations, improvements that would be done otherwise, right? But the Wawa is probably a glaring example of one that probably will. So, and I'll come to that.
If it happens.
Yeah, I understand. And I think we had a similar conversation about I forget what it was called at the time, the development where Dairy Queen and all those other.
Addisville Commons.
Yeah, Addisville Commons, thank you. So I think what we need to see is a cost-benefit analysis and just really see the math. Because if the math makes sense, I'm all in. But we've got to see that the math makes sense, because I don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. Because I think it can be short-sighted to say, well, listen, if somebody's going to improve their property by 50%, only because of the LERTA, that's tax money we wouldn't be getting anyway, and we're going to be getting it 5 years from now. And I want 5 years to be just as important as right now for our district. Number one is we're just going to have to see the math, so however that works out. Number two question is, regarding that Wawa area, can we exclude that area?
We can do anything if the supervisors want to change the boundaries of the district. That property is 5 acres, and Wawa is half of it. They're going to go on they're proposing to go on the upper half. And again, I don't know if they're coming in or not at this point. We've been waiting for a revised final plan for 5 months, and we haven't seen one yet. And I can't seem to get a straight answer from the developer on whether they're gonna go or not. But we could change the boundaries. I think the school property was in the last zone. So I think the reason it's here is because we just kept it in. No one raised an objection to it last time. And again, it's part of our, I think we just followed the boundaries of our overlay district. Could we exclude the Wawa property? I guess we could. But again, I think the incentive for them is that they're agreeing to build us the road improvements that we're looking for that are substantial and costly, that are saving taxpayers money, because we would have to do it on our own if we wanted to do it. I don't know what other business would go in there and spend that kind of money, to make that happen.
Well, I understand, and there's obviously a lot of speculation there, but it's either, if this is something that we can, as a board, this board, get approved or not, because just happen to know with Alerta, if we don't get this entity to approve it, it doesn't make sense to do it at all.
Correct.
So if it's, everything's always a accommodation, right? Often to try to get things done. So, and I'm not saying I'm asking for this, but let's explore it, and we can talk about it at the board meeting, but maybe if we can exclude that Wawa property, maybe other board members come along and something that may not passes, and overall the township's in better shape, even if that one parcel isn't part of it, or a portion of that parcel. So, good, and I'm certain our colleagues on the Board of Supervisors would understand that as well.
Sure.
So that would be something I'd want to have the township come back with, as far as excluding that property, if there's a possibility, and see how the other board members feel about that here. Number 3, I'm happy that Ms. Marcel brought this up. We have 40 jobs that were created, from what you said, and I think that's fantastic. It's fantastic for those 40 people that get to work in the community, and it's also great for us. So, from a math point of view, I'd really like to see what that, if we can quantify somehow, what that increased EIT tax that we've gotten, if it in fact comes back to our district, an estimate. And I understand that a lot of these may have to be estimates, but that's okay. And it's, again, for me, the math is going to be important.
I'm sitting here thinking about how I would do a cost-benefit analysis, because I don't know what someone would come in and apply to do on their property. I don't know if they did, if we assumed that they were coming in, I'd have to look at every property and decide, well, does that one need an addition, or are they going to do improvements? If so, what are they going to do? How much is it going to be assessed at? And then I could do the math. But trying to assume who's going to come in and redevelop their property, what they're going to do with it, how many jobs they're going to create, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know that I could do that. I mean, if you have suggestions, I'm all ears, but think about that. How do you assume what a property's going to do going forward? What an owner's going to do? Are we going to look at all of the underutilized properties and say, okay, well, this one could be utilized to this extent based on the zoning? We'd have to incorporate the zoning and see what the size of the lot is, what the square footage could be if it's not maxed out, and then figure out what that assessed value is based on the cost of the improvement. Mark, I'm pretty good at math and finance and budgets. I'm struggling on that one.
Well, I think everything you just said is appropriate. Any projections are based on assumptions, right?
These are pretty wild assumptions then.
Well, you could do.
So I could tell you anything, I could tell you everything you wanted to hear, and it may not be even close to reality. I'm happy to do that.
Well, listen, you could, so if it were me, Strauss,
I'm not
I mean,
giving you a
since
hard
you're-
time.
Since you're asking, that's okay. Since you're asking my opinion, and I apologize for the time here, if I were trying to sell the LERTA to an organization, I would probably say, I looked at these properties that could potentially be in line, in line to do some renovations, and if 25% of those actually went through with those renovations, this is the number. This would be the number. If 50% of those went through those renovations and improvements, then this could potentially be the number. And if we were really, really lucky and 75% of those went through with those improvements, then this would be the number. That's the way I would do it. I would say if I were trying to convince a body like this, who needs every single nickel we can get to do this, that's probably what I would come back. But I think that's all. I think it's all very positive. It's just, again, we have to see the benefit to the district, the benefit to the taxpayers. We want to be good partners, of course. You rely on us, we rely on you. It's a symbiotic relationship, and not one of us can outperform without the other, right? That's for sure. And that's inclusive of all of our municipalities. I'm sitting here wondering if Newtown Township has a LERTA. I don't know.
I don't think they do.
Yeah, I don't think they do either. But these are all good points. If you came back with some of that data, is this scheduled for our next board meeting, Bill?
I do not have action scheduled yet.
April, I think, is what.
April?
Oh, I'm sorry, that was when we met in March. We were targeting April, so forgive me
Well,
for not.
we do have an expiration, right, for the township?
The previous program expired.
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah,
All right, so
we're trying to get it reauthorized. I will tell you that I did some back of the envelope numbers on the apartment project, and it's about $150,000 in EIT for the township and then also for the district.
Okay.
That's based on the estimated income of the residents, assuming that of their ability to pay those rent levels.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so-
think that's all great information.
And then the
if you-
property taxes, I haven't figured that out yet. I'd have to really get some information on how much these properties are assessed to let you know what that would be. But I
Well,
think-
sure, and anytime you have a property that's not on the tax rolls, and it becomes on the tax rolls, that's a good thing. I remember we did that with the Holy Family
Right.
campus, I think it was, in Newtown Township when I was on the
Newtown,
planning commission
right.
there. So I think it can be very positive. It's just got to be shown to us, right? So that's really what it comes down to. So great presentation. Thank you. Are there any other questions before we move on or comments? Okay, Mr. Pellegrino,
All right.
thank you so much.
I will be back to you and try and have some additional information. Thank you very
That's
much for
great.
your
Thank
time
you.
this evening. And I'll leave these with Bill.
Great, thank you.
Take care. Have a good night, guys.
Okay, moving on. Mr. Stone.
Thank you. Give me while I queue up our presentation. Okay, the next several items all fall under the umbrella of updating on our financial position. So we're going to talk first about how we finished the 2019-20 fiscal year. Again, on an unaudited basis, our auditors have been in, completed their field work, but have not yet officially certified the numbers, but I'm confident in what I'm presenting that it will be materially close to what they're saying. We'll then transition into 21-22 fiscal year budget development, so next fiscal year. And then we have the final discussion is related to the MBIT project and an update there. And that, of course, ties into the capital planning that we will be discussing at the joint finance facilities meeting in November. So we'll talk about a couple of topics, but they're all sort of under the umbrella of an update on our financial position. So this first table is, we're going to go through the results of operations from the fiscal year we just completed. And obviously the main operating fund is our general fund. And this is a comparison of budget versus actual for both revenue and expenditures, the table on your left and the table on your right. So as the board well knows, we finished the last quarter of 1920 under tremendous uncertainty. COVID caused business shutdowns, delays to the income tax filing deadlines, which created a lot of uncertainty around how much EIT would we collect. School buildings were closed, which certainly had an impact on our expenditures, but I'm reporting tonight that we had if you recall, we talked about sort of different ranges of scenarios of where we could finish financially, and we did fortunately finish on the better case scenario end of the spectrum. Our revenue collections came in just about on budget, so you can see here that we had a variance of just a positive variance of just about $100,000 on $242 million of revenue. So essentially spot on with our revenue. Our expenditures had a total variance of $7.7 million under budget, which is higher than we normally see, and obviously there were a number of contributing factors to that, which I'll discuss in just a minute. When you look at this estimated ending surplus of $3.3 million, and you think about that in the context of a real estate tax increase that was just approved in June of 3.1%, and try to reconcile between having a relatively large surplus in terms of pure dollars, $3.3 million is a lot of money to the average person. It's only about 1.4% of our total budget, so it's not significant in terms of the big picture. But when trying to reconcile having a surplus and raising real estate taxes, remember that this information is, it's really a matter of timing. When we approved the budget, we were still in a tremendously uncertain environment. Plus, we were, as we always do, we look toward the future, and budgets are not one-year propositions for us. We have to think about the impact of decisions that are made in any given year and how that will translate into the future. And you will recall that I showed some sobering charts about what would be necessary in order to look ahead. So although this is the better case scenario, we still have to consider the future and make decisions not just on a one-year basis. And we certainly would not have known at the time the budget was approved that the surplus would have been $3.3 million. Our estimates were well below that at that time. So I'll just very quickly cover the differences here. Real estate taxes are billed at the beginning of the fiscal year and collected. They were all collected before the pandemic hit. So this is a more typical collection that we see. We try to be conservative on our collection rate, and we were conservative again this year. We also had a few prior year debt service reimbursements that we got caught up on, so there was some additional revenue associated with that. But then these next three numbers are, I believe, the direct result of the pandemic and its impact. So we had a decreasing number of liens in delinquent real estate taxes, and those are typically the folks who have a more difficult time in paying their school taxes, so we saw decreases in that line item. Earned income tax is sort of a very interesting example of, at the time we were preparing the budget, we not only compare budget to actual collections, we compare budget to what we anticipate that we'll collect. So earned income tax came in less than budget, but greater than was anticipated at the time. So depending on your perspective, we either did better or worse than you thought. Now this is, again, a comparison to budget. So we came in $700,000 under budget when we like to see that number ahead of budget, but we did not do as poorly as initial projections thought. And then lastly, interim real estate taxes, which I believe that's a result of construction activity in that period of time, which most things came to a grinding halt, whether because of mandates or financial reasons. On the expenditure side, we certainly did not spend money on our transportation costs because services were not necessary beginning on March 13th, so for the last quarter of the year. we did not utilize services and therefore saved about $2.6 million in transportation costs. The salaries of $1.8 million, a decrease or under budget, and the contracted substitutes being $700,000 under budget reflect the reality that our environment changed dramatically, and some folks who may have needed to take a leave in the last quarter of the year didn't do so. We needed fewer per diem substitutes because we were not in the school environment, and just things were not normal. If you recall, we froze budgets, and so you see savings in repairs and maintenance and supplies of about $500,000 each. Offsetting those was an increase in our contractually obligated payouts for folks who retire and have accrued sick leave. We had more retirees than expected, most likely due to the pandemic, and therefore we were over budget on that line item. But all told, the net impact was a savings under budget, a positive variance of $7.7 million. Now, recall that when you look at these two numbers, plus 0.1 and minus 7.7 million, we had a budgeted deficit of $4.4 million, so we had to overcome that first in order to end up at this surplus of $3.3 million. We take that surplus of $3.3 million and add that to our fund balance. And these are, again, numbers that I will ask for formal approval from the board in January when the audit report is accepted and these numbers become official. Again, we may see some small variance as the auditors just wrap up their final testing. The first thing that I'll point out is that because of that positive variance in fund balance, it has been the practice to pay that positive surplus forward and transfer funds into the capital reserve fund in order to offset the cost of facility improvement projects or investments in technology or transportation, particularly bus equipment, things of that nature. So we are recommending, and again, this would be on the board's agenda for approval at a future meeting, a transfer of $2.5 million into the capital reserve fund in order to continue to fund those capital improvement projects. So the manner in which we determine these commitments of fund balance happens in this order. We estimate ending fund balance of $23 million, and board policy calls for 5% of that to be set aside as unassigned, what you would perhaps refer to as your rainy day fund. So we multiply that 5% number times our current budget. That translates into just over $12 million of unassigned fund balance. So we then start doing the subtraction and determining our needs in some of these other categories of commitments. The first item is something that's required by accounting principles. We have a $3 million deficit budgeted for the 2021 budget, so we have to set aside those funds. But then we think about our future educational initiatives, which was originally established to help the district implement professional learning communities, or PLCs. Much of that work is now completed. This amount was last year $2.2 million, so it's now been reduced by $700,000 to align with our expected priorities. We believe we need fewer dollars set aside for that work, and therefore we are reallocating those funds. And obviously the big one that we've talked about over the last several months is the unanticipated expenditures for COVID-19. So as we've been developing and implementing the reopening plans, we have incurred costs that were not budgeted because they were very unknown at the time of budget approval for PPE, we had estimated the possibility of additional transportation costs. And so we now have in our committed fund balance, I expect to recommend $6.1 million to be set aside for those reopening related expenditures. And I'll again just briefly remind the board that these are These are only ever one-year commitments. The board has the authority to change the type of commitment or dollar amount of the commitment on an annual basis, so these do not carry on in perpetuity. We used to have commitments for increases in PSERS and other areas, so future healthcare costs. So we can reallocate those. So if we find that COVID-19 expenditures are coming in higher or lower than that number, we can make an adjustment as needed. So that brings our total committed fund balance to $10.6 million. We do have a small bit of assigned fund balance, which is different than the commitments. It doesn't rise to the same level of being specifically called out and required to have board approval, but we have them for administrative tracking. Certain programs that we run, grants that were not fully spent by the end of the year, things like that. It's only about $100,000, but still an impact on our fund balance. So I also like to just update the board on the other funds that the district has in its financial profile. That general fund is obviously the biggest of those funds and gets the most attention due to the budget process and real estate tax increases, but we do have other funds that help move our operation forward. Two that we can lump together are the Capital Reserve Fund and Capital Projects Funds. Those are for summer maintenance projects and for major facility improvement projects, respectively. The bond money gets borrowed and put into the Capital Projects Fund, whereas the transfer that we discussed earlier goes into the Capital Reserve Fund. In 2019-20, we relied on funds in hand to complete both the summer maintenance project as well as the facility improvement projects. We had borrowed sufficient funds for those that we were able to continue to do the work without having an additional borrowing during that fiscal year. Now, certainly as we move forward, another borrowing will be necessary in order to do that, but we were able to get by that with funds on hand in those two funds. The food service fund incurred a loss of about $140,000 for the year. That's obviously due to the closure. The springtime months are typically the most profitable for the food service fund. Plus, we implemented the seamless summer option reimbursement program, which allowed us to provide food to all Council Rock families during the pandemic, which due to the fact that our costs were higher than the reimbursements we received, we did have some losses associated with that. The transfer that we're asking for your approval for at the next board meeting just about offsets that loss. So the food service fund will incur a slight loss, but it will be just about a break-even operation for the year. The medical fund is a standalone fund that we use to isolate our healthcare costs. So the general fund makes contributions to that fund, and then we pay our healthcare claims out of that fund. We had another positive year in terms of claim activity, meaning our employees were healthier than we anticipated, so we did add $5 million in surplus to that fund, which is utilized to help offset the bad years. So we have an amount in there similar to what we have in the general fund that covers us in the event that we have years where we perform worse than expected. And then lastly, the Student Activities Fund, which again, we as the district, we merely act as a custodian of the funds. They belong to the students. The students are the decision makers on these funds, but we do have $866,000 as of the audit date under management for our school buildings and for our students. It's a significant amount of money, and we obviously want to make sure that we do the best we can to manage those funds appropriately and help the students to do the same. I'll take a brief pause there to answer any questions about 1920 before we start to look ahead to the future.
Bill, you did, Mr. Stone, you did say that regarding the decrease in the educational funding, that most of the PLC work has been completed. Is that correct?
The initial investments in the PLC work. PLCs are an ongoing activity, but the initial investment in training and implementation costs is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good. Well, that's a good thing.
Thank you. Joe?
Thanks, this is great stuff. Really appreciate it, making a lot of sense. And every year it makes a little more sense. You're making it make a lot more sense. So I appreciate that. Just real quick, the summer food program, you said we had a loss there. I was kind of an advocate saying, hey, Neshamony's doing this. And so it wasn't a net operation with that even. And then we're also doing it for the rest of this calendar year, I believe. Are we going to realize losses doing that also?
As of right now, I am anticipating that the program will continue to run at a loss, yes. I'm planning to present a more thorough evaluation of the program at the next Finance Committee meeting, but
Okay.
there's a sweet spot where we have labor and food costs that are a little bit more fixed in order to run the program, and we need to hit a certain number of meals in order to be able to cover those costs with the reimbursement we get. And we weren't there because of participation levels in the program. So we need to hit certain participation in order to be able to.
So we need more participants to make it break even. Okay, thank you.
Indeed,
Right, because
yes.
you're using the manpower, but not getting the meals into the hands and getting reimbursed. Okay, that's
I
good
would
to
say
know.
we are. I believe that families that need it are able to take advantage, but we could use a few more folks.
Maybe we can promote it a little
take
more.
advantage.
And then the last, I think we looked at the $6.1 million, which is, we need to spend money to be safe. I'm wondering if it's worth sharing the line item list of what we're using or a summary type of thing, because those cleaners are really expensive, and I'm wondering if if there's more, should I say, not hospital grade cleaning things we can use, and maybe more domestic cleaners that do the same thing if we're just talking about COVID.
So, Mr. Hidalgo, I can tell you that it's not a detailed list, but the budget dashboard that I've been preparing and posting to the website has a little section on our COVID spending, but I can certainly summarize it at one level down on the expenditures that are coming into that number. I don't know it off the top of my head. I estimate it's somewhere in the $2.25 million range right now, and that includes our investment in the technology equipment, devices and live streaming, PPE, and there is one other line item that I can't recall right now, but I can get a more detailed breakdown for the board.
All right, thank you. Good
You're
stuff.
welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, moving along. Thank you.
Okay, so it is now, believe it or not, feels like we just finished last year's budget, or this current year's budget, and now it's time to start thinking about next year's. But again, the transition as we finish the audit year and now move into another budget year, these are all decisions that we need to have this information to make the best path forward. So you'll remember that with budget planning, I like to start at the highest level, and as we move through the process, drill down into more detailed levels. So we're going to start today we're just reviewing the timeline of events that will need to happen for this upcoming budget, and then make a connection next month to the long-term plan and the future year impacts that we're seeing. But to help do that, I'll, on the next slide, set the landscape of our largest costs, our biggest revenue, and then things that are impacting that are going to impact the budget development process. So I've highlighted for you the key deadlines on the timeline here, and please recall that there are two separate timelines that the board can take. The first is called the accelerated timeline, which was the path that the board had taken in prior years, where it simply approves a resolution that states it will not increase real estate taxes above the Act 1 index. Once that happens, this year it has to happen this is the board meeting date, so the board meeting of January 7th would need to happen in order to be in compliance with the Act 1 timeline. If that resolution is approved at that time, the board skips a lot of the initial budget development steps officially and moves into approving a proposed final budget at the end of April and a final budget at the beginning of June. Following the standard timeline, where instead of approving that resolution, the board would reserve the right to apply for and potentially utilize the Act 1 exceptions, which would allow it to increase real estate taxes above the Act 1 index. You have to, the date would be our February 4th board meeting, approve a preliminary budget, so go through the budget development process to demonstrate the need to apply for exceptions, and then apply for those exceptions, file them with the Department of Education, and that happens shortly thereafter. And then moving into the proposed final budget again in April, and the final budget in June. I've inserted this not required step, or this non-required deadline of submitting a referendum question to the Bucks County Board of Elections, which would allow increases above the Act 1 index plus any available exceptions. So I certainly, by just simply putting one deadline up there, don't want to underestimate the amount of work and planning that goes into making that decision, but I put that in there as something because we did discuss the possibility of needing a referendum in the future, given some of the financial pictures that we were looking at. That's a decision to be made in the future, not a recommendation tonight. So I like to, when I think about our budget, the first thing that I want to do is line up the two big items on our budget. So we have the real estate taxes representing about $160 million out of $250 million of revenue, and the salaries and benefits, this in particular for our teachers, representing somewhere in the neighborhood of $140 million when you add in the increases to the PSERS rate. So the Act 1 index this year is certified at 3%, which is an increase over the 2021 index. The reason for that is the Act 1 index is a lagging indicator, and it does not yet include the state wages from calendar year 2020. Those will be included in the next year Act 1 index. So I'll just reiterate that you're seeing the compounding impact and the long-term impact of the pandemic, because assuming that 2020 has lower wages, that is going to carry through because it's a 3-year weighted or 3-year rolling average. You're going to carry those lower wages into future years. So they will first come on in the 22-23 index and then carry through for the next 3 years, and will drop out presumably higher years of wages. That 3% Act 1 index generates about $4.9 million of additional revenue. The teacher salaries plus the the PSERS rate increase, the PSERS rate is set to go from 34.5% to 34.9%. That increase is calculated right now at $1.6 million, and that's simply just moving those teachers that are currently on our payroll onto their next step. You will recall that this is the 21-22 will be, the first half of the year will be a freeze, continuation of the freeze that was approved back in May, and so you're seeing that impact. That increase is slightly less than what we would normally see because of that half-year freeze. But then in the second half of the year, the teachers will move in accordance with the agreement that was approved. Certain teachers will move 2 steps on the schedule, certain teachers will move 1 step, and the newest hired teachers will not move steps. This also includes more retirees than we anticipated, so the salary costs are compressed a little bit at the lower end of the salary schedule because we had more retirees that were at higher salaries replaced with new teachers at lower salaries. So when you look at those two line items, that's obviously, they're big dollar amounts, but there's a whole lot more to the budget that we need to consider, particularly in light of coming out of the pandemic or staying in the pandemic, whichever one it turns out to be. But there is still uncertainty around revenue collections that we need to look at. We saw an increase in EIT in the beginning of the year because of that push of the filing deadline, but we need to evaluate the long-term effects of what COVID is doing to wages and whether the pandemic continues and depresses wages further. That prior slide obviously did not include the costs for CRESPA or CRA. It did not include healthcare costs because, again, those are figures that are just not the same in terms of materiality, but there are obviously contractual increases on both of those groups, and we anticipate that there will be changes in healthcare trends. This year is very unique in terms of our staffing profile because we've had to utilize ESS more than we had in prior years to procure the necessary staff to start the year, but we also anticipate that we may see some additional per diem substitute costs, not only because of increasing the rate, but because of the fact that the pandemic may have an effect on employee absences. As I reviewed at a prior meeting, we are already seeing some increased charter school costs. We are up about 18 students enrolled in charter schools year over year, and so that's something that we will have to factor into the budget and determine whether that is a long-term increase or whether that is something that is just because of the pandemic and those students will return once we return to 5 days a week instruction. And then, a sobering thought to consider is that we have certain consumable PPE that we may need to be purchasing if we need to maintain some semblance of a health and safety plan into the future year. That's obviously tremendously uncertain because no one knows the status of the virus and what's going to be happening in a couple of years, but it's something that I think about as we are now starting to develop this budget and determine how much we might need, if we'll need it, and whether or not we'll be able to utilize the funding that we have set aside in our COVID fund balance bucket. Also, obviously, with our discussion last week around the return to 5 days a week, there's the potential for staffing costs that are not contemplated in this original calculation. This was a point in time of our staffing profile, and we'll obviously have to incorporate any changes that result from that decision. So that concludes just the very first step in the 21-22 budget process. Before we move on to our last item, I think it's appropriate to pause and take any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I think this is a simple one, Mr. Stone. The unexpectedly high number of retirees that you referred to, was that the normal springtime retirees, not more recently, correct?
We had the initial wave was, forgive me, I'm not recalling the date. We have in the collective bargaining agreement, there's a date that they have to certify. We did extend that because of the pandemic and picked up several more retirees. So I think we came in around 30 retirees instead of the normal 20 that we sort of average. And I think a lot of that picked up in that second phase.
Yeah, thank you.
Joe.
Thanks. So thank you again. The $1.6 million increase, we had more retirees. There's other contributing factors, and the money back that they had given all helped to lower this increase. Also, the 5 days a week, we're looking at it from a different standpoint. Are we employing less people now than we would usually? Is that impacting this number? How much, or
I don't know that I can state with certainty whether it's going to have a positive or negative impact. I expect it will have some impact, and I only raise it because it's at top of mind. for all the work that we're doing, trying to think about right now as well as next year and moving forward.
I appreciate the transparency, but I'm just wondering, we're not employing less people now than we had when we were at work 5 days a week?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Brooks, any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, I'll move on. I just have 2 comments, and Mr. Stone, I apologize if you mentioned this, but I think it's worth the comment. I greatly appreciate a $3.3 million surplus in this budget, but I don't want to get too excited about it and thinking that everything's okay going forward, because I don't think it's going to be that way going forward. I think we were very lucky this year, and it had to do with the way the tax revenues fell, right? And transportation was way down. I think the second one was salaries, right?
Yes.
The Act 1 index is up this year, but as you said, unless the legislature does something different in their calculation, it's very, very likely. 11 million jobs were lost because of this, and I don't know what portion of that is in Pennsylvania, but it's bound to affect the Act 1 index. So I just don't want to put those rose-colored glasses on quite yet with our budget projections. I hope we get there at some point, but I just want to, you're nodding your head, so I'm hoping that means you agree. Thank you.
I agree. I'm not. I feel exactly the way you do.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that indulgence. So moving on, MBIT capital projects update.
Thank you. So just very quickly, we're revisiting another topic that we discussed the day before the closure, which is the projects that the MBIT is contemplating. And again, just very quickly, the rough amount, $8.5 million over a 5-year period. Council Rock contributes about 1/3 of that, which translates to about $2.8 million. You see that table I utilized back in March, but have now just advanced the contributions 1 year because of the delays associated with COVID. Our original recommendation was to fund these projects with cash over a 5-year period, and the sending districts had all agreed to that, and we were in the process of developing the funding agreement to do that. So the new wrinkle in the conversation, which drives the next couple of slides we'll discuss, is the fact that as interest rates have remained very low, MBIT now has the opportunity to refinance its existing debt, which is something certainly that I would recommend that the board support, because there's an estimated savings in total of just shy of $500,000, of which Council Rock would share in $160,000, which would go to offset the project costs on the screen here. There's one option is to structure the refinancing so that those savings are front-loaded and could be deposited into MBIT's capital account and used as essentially a cash contribution against the total project cost. So that refinancing opportunity kind of opened up the question around, do we have an interest rate environment that warrants, instead of using cash from the sending districts, is money cheap enough to borrow for these projects and potentially make it a more palatable project? And again, when you have a refinancing project and you know that you are going to be borrowing new money for other things, it's best to combine those transactions, because you have economies of scale with bond counsel, financial advisor fees, underwriters, all of those costs. That's a strategy that we've employed here many times when we've refinanced and borrowed. We've tried to time those two together. So that's the reason why the conversation is sort of back to the front of minds here. Did it make sense to try to evaluate the project? So when we're just sort of revisiting the same conversation we had back in March, which is, how does this affect our budget? And then how does, what are we looking at in the total project cost when you add in financing? So we'll do a comparison on the next slide of the pros and cons of cash versus borrowing. We are, I'll just share that we are right in the uncomfortable spot of it being too much to just outright say yes to cash, but too little for it to make real sense to borrow. So we look at this table here, which is the cash versus borrow analysis. You're looking at an additional $500,000 to $900,000 to borrow the funds over our total CR investment of $2.6 million. So that number, that 2.6 is the original estimate of just about 2.8 minus the refinancing savings that would be applied to the project. So that accounts for that difference there. These last two sections here really in short speak to what would happen if we took either approach, and how it would exacerbate the current funding issues that we have for Council Rock projects. Because if we use cash, we have less money available for the many facility improvement projects that we have. The general fund would need to potentially contribute more money to capital reserve in order to pay for those, or we would have to borrow on our own to do some of those projects, which is something that we contemplated in the spring and that we intend to revisit as part of next month's discussion around long-term planning. The flip side of borrowing, or having MBIT borrow and then increasing our debt payment to MBIT, is obviously there's an impact on the annual budget of estimated about $48,000 to $56,000 per year, and that's over the life of the bonds, so for a 20-year period. So at this juncture, before I go over the recommendation that when I prepared the presentation, the executive committee has since started to revisit the topic a little bit more and talk amongst the sending districts about whether or not there's an alternative approach to perhaps doing a smaller portion of the projects rather than proceeding with the entire set of projects. So there's no recommendation tonight right now that's going to be moving forward to the board, but this is, it is the wheels are turning a little bit, and MBIT may be asking us for a recommendation shortly. Our recommendation right now is to stick to that original plan, pay cash over the 5 years, really just to try to avoid some of those longer-term borrowing costs that we would incur when we think, forward to future years. We want to try to maintain that discipline in our budget process of making sure we're extending ourselves appropriately, and I think that 5 years gives us that runway to be able to plan our cash needs and be able to afford it and not incur that additional annual cost. The refinancing, in my opinion, it makes tremendous sense. We should certainly, when it's available, approve the resolution to have MBIT refinance those bonds and apply the savings to either the first year cash contribution or to the overall borrowing, if that's the approach that we choose to take. So again, I'll just reiterate, there's no recommendation on the table these are the recommendations right now, but there's not action that we'll be placing on the agenda for November 5th at this point in time. It's possible that in the interim between now and then we may revisit and I'll update the board accordingly.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. Stone? None. Okay. Makes sense to me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stone. While we're here, if the board will indulge me, can we get an update on the Financial Advisory Committee?
Certainly. Mr. Riborowski, the chair of the Financial Advisory Committee, will be at our meeting next month to give an update. Recently, the committee has been having meetings with what we've been calling our subject matter experts, so some of our consultants and brokers for our big ticket items in the budget. So we had a presentation on, just for example, debt service this week. So Zach Willier from PFM presented what we've been calling a sort of a 201 level course for the Financial Advisory Committee. We had a salaries and benefits presentation. And those presentations are helping the committee with the background knowledge that they need to be able to start to develop recommendations for the board and also to observe the upcoming budget process and really be able to intelligently dive into the work that we'll be doing and make their recommendations. So I know that they have started to come up with some ideas that we can incorporate, and they'll be doing so in their final report that we see.
That's great. I just want to thank all the volunteers again. Are they still meeting at like 3 a.m.?
Feels like it. They are still meeting at 7:30 in the morning.
Okay. Well, thank you to all you folks that are helping us. And listen, it couldn't be more timely, right, to have a group of community members to help us in this situation. Did you have a
Yeah, I
comment?
think it's marvelous. I think it was a great idea to form it, and I was talking to Mr. Stone beforehand, and what impressed me is the fact that they put a whole lot of time into simply learning about our finances, which is to their credit, because that's a difficult thing to do, to sit there and, absorb all that information meeting after meeting. So it's really to their credit. I think it's a marvelous thing.
It is. Thank you, Mr. Tate. Okay, any other comments or questions? Anything else, Mr. Stone?
No?
Okay, hearing nothing else. Do we have any public comment that we have to entertain at all for this meeting?
That I'm
No?
aware of.
That's it.
Okay, very good. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.